another episode in our ongoing series exploring mounds of memory. It's Professor of Archaeology Howard Williams here and my esteemed colleague, Dr. Irina-Maria Manea. So today we're going to be looking at mounds. We keep looking at mounds and funerary practices from the Viking Age, looking at archaeology and written sources, and we're dancing around this relationship between the different evidence strands that we have in approaching different geographical and chronological and thematic aspects. But today we're heading for mainland Scandinavia, which we've touched on before, but we're going back to look at a very specific mound with a particular kind of mythology, story about it. So really, Irina, you take us forward. Why are we looking at this particular mound? What's the story here? Why is this particularly interesting?
Well, we are looking at this particular mound called Raknehaugen, the mound of King Rakni, which I think sounds awesome. We're looking at it because...
It sounds brilliant.
Yeah, because it is one of the largest monuments in Europe, and it is the largest mound in Norway. Yes, it is a mound found in the region of Romerike in Norway. It's very close to Oslo. I'm going to show you in a jiffy. And it has a very interesting story of interpretations. It has a very rich cultural history of archaeological interpretations, like mixing all kinds of aspects related to the politics of memory and heritage. Now, first, we must say that it is called King Rakni's mound, because people generally tended to associate legendary kings to these mounds without them actually having any connection to them. So we don't really know where this is coming from, but I suppose if we dig up some medieval documents, we are definitely going to find some boundary markers there. And maybe there we can find the first mentions of King Rakni. But anyway, this was the legend in the 18th and 19th century when the first excavations at this mound took place. And everyone in the region knew this mound as being the mound of a king, the mound of King Rakni.
So this is part of a broader phenomenon, isn't it? You find this in Sweden as well. There's these names attributed, but we don't really know how old that tradition goes. So this one, it may be quite old, though.
Yeah, indeed. So I would like to point out that the new studies related to burial mounds have tried to overcome that more traditional interpretations of them being a symbol of power, or a king ordering the local community to erase a monument in their honor. And we can do that in a couple of ways. For example, by means of cultural memory, by means of showing how monuments are durable anchors for social relations, and also using the archaeology of emotion. So that is with reference to what the people, how the people were actually related to the landscape at the time, and how they were trying to use the landscape in order to produce new identities or new collective groups and the such. So this mound was built in the 6th century, and for a very long time, it was believed that it was a monument dedicated to an individual royal power. Instead, the newer interpretation tries to frame it as a collective ritual response to perhaps a catastrophic event.
Right, so it's not elite power at all. It's not over a single grave or anything.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, in the sense that if it's big and visible, it doesn't automatically mean that some king by the name of Rakni or whatever, Ragnar, was the one responsible for its construction. And this new shift has been driven by a combination of new data, like environmental data, and radiocarbon dating as well, and a new assessment based on this archaeology of emotions I mentioned earlier. So in the 6th century, we have a period of extreme environmental turmoil, because we have this massive volcanic eruption that would have caused a dust veil that would have obscured the sun, and it led to almost a decade of global cooling and crop failure in Scandinavia. And there are also studies showing that perhaps this was also the source of inspiration for the myth of the winter in Norse mythology, of the Fimbul winter, the great winter. Yeah. So Seber's interpretation in the article Monuments as Active Cooperation is based on the idea that the construction can be seen as sort of like a sacrificial appeal to the gods intended to maybe stabilize a society that was suffering from this dread caused by this kind of environmental change and about a 50% population decline. And former interpretations, like I said, have always focused on the mound as a symbol of hierarchy, as a symbol of power, and this top-down approach of felling timber and then organizing it into a mound. But a different interpretation would be rather in the direction of the construction being seen as maybe a collective effort or an act of solidarity or joint action. So it's basically turning from this very privatized view towards a more collective one. Here we can also invoke other examples of people reacting in that sort of crisis. For example, we have rituals of depositing gold that can also be interpreted in that way. So in essence, we might be dealing here with a community that has decided to build like this massive monument in order to appease the gods maybe, but it's not really certain. But at any rate, to participate together in a sort of performative event that results in this sort of monument that might suggest that they're all together and they're all trying to react and make sense of what was happening to them. Right. And we also have a massive decline in invisible burials at the time, suggesting that being remembered in the 6th century might have indicating a shift to being remembered as part of a group, rather something more community-based. And the author also speaks about the emotions that would have been involved in this process, the emotion of awe, for example, that would have been triggered by, encountering something of a massive scale and thus making individuals more willing to cooperate with strangers and then fostering a shared identity. The materials that were used in the mound apparently also carried a deep symbolic weight because the pine logs, for example, the analysis shows that many of them were farmyard trees. So in a way, I think they can be considered some sort of symbols of family or symbols of family prosperity. So they would have been cleared from established fields.
Oh, so they're not just woodland that's around everywhere in Scandinavia. Right, they're managed woodland.
Point. Yeah, that's the interesting point. So in the sense, maybe they were like trying to unify their individual daily experiences and landscapes and memories into like this single unit as a sort of collective anchor at the time. And the timber, it was sealed so quickly that the pine bark was still green and the birch sap was fresh, which is again,
this mound wasn't
amazing.
Earth at all. It wasn't rocks. It was all timber.
It's timber. It also has layers of sand and clay. It's fixed with
So it's held, but it's the main.
It's held together.
The main composition is the trees from the farms.
Yes, and a lot of them are fresh. Yeah. Indeed. So I think this suggests that it took place in sort of like an urgent manner, high-speed construction process. And this might have also contributed to like sort of like burning the event into like this one big collective memory of the participants. And we do have some human remains as well, but the thing is that they do not date back to the Iron Age. They date back about 1700 years earlier. So they were using something from the Bronze Age. This is something that we see in a lot of cases, like using monuments either from the Neolithic or from the Bronze Age. It's something we often encounter in the Viking-age as well, as a form of like appropriating the past and like building something on older layers in order to form your own identity. In a way.
Well, do you mean they think there was originally a Bronze Age burial mound there that they augmented and expanded upon? Is that?
I don't know about the burial mound, but the human remains at any rate. So maybe they were brought from somewhere else, but at any rate they were trying to like draw a connection
Yeah.
to these human remains. And that's really interesting because for a very long time it was believed that, this burial mound must have belonged to a king from the 6th century. No, it didn't.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
And
fascinating.
yeah, right. So could it be that this was used as some sort of ritual fertilizer as well?
Yes.
Or yeah, if not so, then maybe at least an anchor to a distant past that would have, afforded more legitimacy and a new pillar of identity to these people that were interacting with these older materials at the time. So the way I see it, it seems that the mound is more symbolic than anything else. So yeah, the top-down approach definitely is something that is being called into question here.
Do we know much about the immediate landscape context? Because obviously sea levels will be different and it's inland now, but it would be more accessible in the 6th century. Would it have been? I don't know if it would actually be on a maritime inlet, but would it have been at least surrounded by water, or would it have been? I know it's by a lake today, as that photograph shows, and it's surrounded by farmland from modern maps. But I mean, do we have any sense of whether it was a more watery environment or more, you know?
I think it was watery on one side, and then you have the farmland on the other side, and then you also have some woodland further away.
Right.
Yeah. I think the position was also really good. But yeah,
Yeah.
in this small research, I actually focus more on the approach the archaeologists had in the 19th and 20th century, because I think that
Oh.
also speaks a lot about the zeitgeist of the age on the one hand, and also about how they approached this and how they themselves contributed to new layers of mythical history. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's very interesting to see what the local community did with this monument as well, because there was a magistrate here in the 19th century called Koren, and the lady of the house called Christiane Koren, the wife of the local magistrate in the area of Raknehaugen, which is close to the church of Hovin, by the way. She actually contributed to this whole mythical memory by transforming it into a monument that was very, very personal, but also very national at the time, so to speak. So we are talking about the year 1808, so during the Napoleonic Wars, and this was a period of intense national anxiety, so to speak, also food shortages, hatred for Sweden, and also rumors of an English invasion. So all contributed to like this overgrown anxiety in the community. So Christiane Koren thought it would be a good idea to construct a stone structure above the mound, atop of the mound, which she thought might resemble a temple of the sort.
Oh.
Yeah, right. So she wanted to, contribute herself to this monument. And I think such an act would contribute to transforming a historical site into what is known in literature as a nemotope, like this sort of space and time capsule fused together to provide the community with like a sort of stable reference point, particularly in times of crisis. So we can see a couple of parallels to what the people were doing in the 6th century, but at the same time, here we're dealing with a very individualized, subjective approach of the past. So this is one aspect, the national aspect, but there is also the more subjective aspect of the personal memorization, because her son unfortunately died of cholera. So this prompted her to replace the stone house she built on the mound with a gazebo. She named Wilhelmsminne, so the memory of her son Wilhelm. It also featured a small kitchen, so yeah, she basically tried to create here a cenotaph, like a symbolic memorial for her dead son, and she, I think, managed to turn this ancient mound into a site for personal grieving and also reflection. It is also
Wow.
related, related that the others at the time, they used to come here the others from the community, I mean, they used to come here and spend the night in this location, like watch the sunrise over the plains, and just admire the whole landscape. So in a way, I think this is also a ritual act because it used like the physical monumentality, the physical height of the mound to like sort of induce this sublime experience of the nature and of the general landscape back then. Right, there is also a lot of folklore from the time as well. She seems to have been aware of the legend of the so-called King Rakni, and she also wrote in her diary about that. She wrote about him being buried with two white horses, for example, and also about him wandering about near the mound, dressed as a black shadow or something of the sort.
Wow.
Yeah.
So these are existing folkloric stories that are
Mm,
only recorded for the first time by her, or
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Right, King Rakni, I mean, yeah, we do find its name in Snorri Sturluson's work, but then again, he is presented just as a sea king. I don't think it has anything to do with Ragnar in any way, but then again, Snorri has these very long lists with all kinds of legendary kings. So, yeah, probably a very distant memory, a very vague memory of a potential King Rakni from the Iron Age or even earlier. What I find very interesting is that the local community actually didn't quite enjoy the modifications she made to the mound.
Oh,
On the
really?
contrary, yeah, on the contrary, they kind of viewed it as an offense to the buried king, and we can see here a sort of like a tension between this attempt at romanticizing the whole area, and then there is the local memory of the place highlighted by all these stories about these ghostly appearances of the king, and they wanted everything to stay like the same. You know, the mount of the king should have stayed intact. And yeah, I think also in her diary, we also have some mentions of local women who came to wash at the nearby water and hearing a violent rumble inside the mound. And this was interpreted by the locals as being a sign that the king was very displeased with what was going on and he wanted this gazebo to be torn down.
That's so fascinating. That's so rare that we get any evidence. It must be more common than we have records
I
of
think so, yeah.
local people actually reacting to these. Not, I mean, different places, different individuals, royal, religious elites, or local gentry, or whatever you want. You know, different places, different,
Mhm.
but elite appropriations. That's so fascinating.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Right. But then the fate of the gazebo, it also illustrates like a shift in memory and the materiality of memory, because it was eventually demolished, and then its stones were used to repurpose to build. Sorry, to the stones were repurposed to build the wall of a barn. So this very mundane construction. Yeah, so it would represent a transition from this very symbolic romantic usage to a more plain, practical, like useful reappropriation, where her personal grief was basically dismantled. There was no memory of it any longer. But then again, the material parts, they were absorbed into the more utilitarian life world of the local farming community. So yeah, the memory of the magistrate's family was actually weaker than the memory of this king, who was still residing in his mound, according to some from the local community. And we also have some poets and painters who tried to um, also romanticize the whole image of the mount. We can see here a picture of Johannes Flinto, and there is also
That's from the
uh,
church to the southwest, is
yeah,
it? Sort of, yeah.
yeah, the Hovin church. And we also have a poem from Konrad Schwach, who was a friend of the family of the magistrate. And yeah, I'm sorry, here I have it in Norwegian, but I'm just gonna mention two or three things. So he basically says, you proud barrow, so stolte høy, you who are sitting in the sands of the plain, where in the distance I can spy the mountains, as firm as rocky crags rising high above me, and mirrors yourself in the deep water. And then he uses all kinds of metaphors for it. The cradle of your giant body. What do you conceal in your mighty embrace? Is it a beloved king from distant days who could not march to bloody war to write the name in blood? Mourned and honored like a reborn Baldur, yet you are silent. So something of the sort. You can see clearly the romantic infusion here.
Yeah.
A lot of reverence. And yeah, at the end of the poem, he does mention that this was something he particularly dedicated to the son who died, Christiana's son.
Was there any particular, was it an illness, or is there any dramatic circumstance of death that informed this, or was it, do we not know?
You mean her son?
Yeah.
He died of cholera.
It was a sort of rapid.
Yeah.
I
think it was quite common at the time.
Yeah.
All right, so this is the kind of stuff we find in the legends, the romantic legends of the 19th century. And then the first excavation is being led by the archaeologist Anders Lorange. He conducted it in the second half of the 19th century. Well, Anders Lorange, he was very influenced by, the general trends of the time, like scientific positivism, Comte's positivism, also a bit of national pride, although a little less than you might expect. I think the deepest controversy regarding this project was the fact that it was conducted quite chaotically and more or less independently. Because he did not manage to get enough funding, and then he was lucky enough to belong, or to at least to be acquainted with a circle of very rich people from Norway at the time. So yeah, this ensured that he could conduct the archaeology of the place more or less independently. And he was just 20 years old when he did this. Anyway, he saw this. Yeah, he was very young. He saw this as an object of study on the one hand, but he also saw it as a sacred monument requiring protection and rehabilitation. So we can see maybe the seeds of heritage protection at the time, or at least the shallow preoccupation with it. He was very inspired by the excavations done at the Royal Mounds of Uppsala at the time, and he did want to do it also because he wanted to show that this was larger than the Royal Mounds in Sweden. So yeah, national pride,
national competition thing, yeah.
yeah, definitely, to foster a bit of national pride as well. Because yeah, if he did that, he would have provided Norway with superior cultural symbol, which would have definitely played a part at the time. But yeah, like I said, the way he approached it did lead to accusations of archaeological piracy. He competed with the more traditional institutions such as the Antiquities Collection, the Old Samlingen from Christiania from Oslo, and ultimately, I think what he attempted to do was an act of disciplined memory, and the physical site being elevated into this symbolic anchor for the nation's perceived historical greatness and sovereignty. At the time, also lots of mounds were excavated from the same area, from Akershus, and some stuff was found as well, some arm rings, for example, but nothing of importance at this particular site. And although he did seem reckless in his approach, he was still professional in the sense that he really documented what he did with precision, at least in reference to the standards of the time. He applied the three-period system in his work in general, so Stone, Bronze, and Iron Age, and also dealt with the systematic collection of what was found in the area of Akershus, and also he meticulously documented the mound's capsule construction. He did notice the layers of sand. He noticed the sandy clay, the thick marsh soil as well. And writing about it means that he started a process of like moving the site from this, I don't know, floating oral tradition, so to speak, into the more institutionalized archive of written history. And his team was actually the first to uncover the pine logs that made up the core of the mound. So they were onto something, even as early as the mid-19th century. At the time, the discovery was quite sensational because it suggested that the local folklore talking about timber fellers building the mound did have some actual truth value.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that's because people had uncovered some of the timbers before and that sparked the legend, or do you think there may be something else going on?
Yeah, probably maybe inspiration from other monuments of the
Yeah.
time on the one hand, and on the other hand, I presume it was sort of like a collective wisdom, because there were lots of farmers in the area, and they probably tried to imagine themselves how such a construction would have taken place, and sometimes intuition, could have added to the story, maybe.
Mm.
They did find a horse carcass within the timber layers. And yeah, here is where it gets interesting, because when the pick broke the bog soil encapsulating the animal, it is said that it emitted such a violent stench that the diggers had to flee the ditch, which to me is very interesting, because this reminds me of the stories about the undead from some of the legendary sagas, which have also this stench. It's not, I mean, in the sagas, it's not the stench itself, but more like what reactions it provokes, the more important and more relevant. But in this case, it would have probably been so, but this definitely added to a new layer of folklore, because for about 100 years afterwards, people would still remember that the mound contained some kind of poisonous air, and believed that some of the diggers died from gas, which was not the case, but at any rate, like the sort of the snowball effect of the folklore.
The curse of King Rakni, yes.
Yeah, the curse of King Rakni, yeah, exactly. Right. Eventually, the work area became too narrow and the risk of collapse became too great, so he had to abandon the project that was half completed. But he does something that again adds to one more layer of memory, which is he leaves symbolically as a gesture of closure. He writes a farewell letter to his girlfriend, and he places a handful of coins in a bottle, and he buries it all at the bottom of the excavation. So yeah, I think for him it was sort of like a closure, because I think he was aware that he was not going to come back to this project, and also a message to future generations of archaeologists who are going to investigate the mound. He wanted to leave his mark. I think it's understandable. And it's not the only time he does that. He did the exact same thing with Myklebust.
Yes, that's what was recently found, wasn't it?
He's the guy writing
Right, I
messages
didn't
in
make
the
the
bottle.
connection. Right, okay.
Yeah, he's the one with the bottles. Yeah,
And there's a lot of
exactly.
examples of 19th century archaeologists in the UK doing the same thing. Thomas Bateman, the Derbyshire barrow digger, would leave. He had actually made little coins, little tokens with his own sort of visage on. So it was a kind of, it was like it's like a medallion of like a souvenir for the future. So yeah, they are thinking about that. They're trying to leave their mark on these places.
Right.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I think he basically created a sort of temporal bridge, because he unified the deep past by excavating the mound, and then his own present, and also it was also a bridge to the future. Very interesting. So yeah, unfortunately, he did not have the ability to like make the subject, the topic, truly alive for the general public. But what's most important here is that he managed to document for the first time, to like really document in a very detailed manner for the time all he did. At least it was useful in that sense. And another aspect I found interesting is that he also tried to like distance himself from the traditional shaft digging to a well, to a vertical well method, although that wasn't very useful either. He was at any rate very disappointed that he found no king. But yeah, by noticing that it required an enormous effort to build this sort of monument, he did toy with ideas of a lot of people taking part in such a project. But then this whole idea developed about you know, the whole community actually working upon the command of a particular king. And yeah, the ideas we have nowadays, like I showed at the very beginning, about like people themselves taking the initiative of building such a thing, that was not really happening in the 19th century. They were obsessed with finding the king who was responsible for this. So he resorted to Jordanes, for example, to find some names of tribes for that particular area and maybe find the king, the mysterious king of Romerike. There is also a later legend about him having found like this golden armband, which he eventually gifted to not the girlfriend he was writing the letter in the bottle to, but to a future girlfriend. But that's, I mean, it's not very certain whether he actually found it here or somewhere in the area. This is a stray find, so we don't really know much about it. But again, another layer of folklore. It is said that this armband was the one he found at the bottom. He found no king, but he found this armband. Yeah, but to be taken with a very large pinch of salt. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Okay, so yeah, so I just wanted to show here briefly. So Romerike, like this region, and yeah, a lot of archaeologists were interested in this region back in the day. There were a lot of attempts to link these mounds to the sagas. Also, this idea of the sacrificial mound, because in the saga of Halfdan the Black, for example, we have that famous example of the different parts of the body of the king being used as yeah, ritually as how should as a sacrifice, as a foundation, foundation for future mounts, and that will ensure prosperity and fertility in that particular region. So yeah, the main idea was that they perceived it as some sort of sacred mausoleum. Right. What else can we say? There was at the time also the attempt to elaborate a museum of antiquities in Bergen and all kinds of scientific journals. And these were again more or less related to the family of that magistrate I mentioned before, Johan Koren, who was the owner of Hovin. For example, he financed a journal called Urd, again using this sort of like mythological language, which was very popular at the time. Lorange also managed to write a thesis called The Sword of the Younger Iron Age, and then he basically paved the way for others to continue similar work in other areas of Norway. For example, Håkon Shetelig, who wrote about the Oseberg ship, and Anton Brøgger, although they also tried to integrate new approaches related to, for example, technology. They're also interested in the social aspects. For example, who are those people who are involved? Who are the farmers at the time? And can we know anything at all about the settlement of the period? And what I think is very worth mentioning is the fact that they did try to distance themselves from that very problematic concept of archaeological cultures at the time. So Kosinas theory, which was very popular in Germany, for
Yes.
example. So they were nationalistic, but at the same time, they did try to maintain sort of like a healthy distance and try to prevent maybe more or less more problematic, very questionable appropriations of the Norwegian deep past.
May I just make a point there for
Please.
viewers and listeners about the history of archaeology, that the culture historical model of equating assemblages of particular date to particular ethnic groups from proto-historic and early historic times does feed into extreme political ideologies of in Germany, but it also is the underpinning of many of almost all of the nation states of Europe, but the nationalisms it upheld take very different forms. And so this is a whole separate lecture, but I always try to qualify that people often soundbite culture history with that racialized, political ideological use of the past, and that is not wrong. That is absolutely correct, but it's not all of the same blend, the same shade, and you've got to understand it within the particular histories of institutions, individual researchers in any individual country. So I'm not being an apologist for culture history, which is what I get accused of every time I try and enter any nuance. But that's a really important point you make about how, so whether you're looking at Italy or you're looking at different parts of Italy or looking at different parts of England, it'll have different manifestations in how people are promoting the story of particular localities and regions and nations. In Scotland and Ireland, for example, very different kinds of nationalistic archaeology, but still within that culture historical framework. So yeah, we can't sort of dump them all in the same, category.
Yeah, exactly. I think the main point of criticism from a contemporary perspective would be the obsession of the German archaeologists to draw this link between the first historical written sources about a region and what is archaeologically there. I think that was this obsession they had with finding what's the oldest. Right. But despite the fact that they started to be more and more interested in the social aspects, we again see these attempted links between certain historical personalities. The more known example is the one of Oseberg and Queen Osa. But then again, we also have, for example, in the case of Borre, the notion that they might have had something to do with the Inglingar dynasty, like the semi-legendary dynasty that Snorri Sturluson theorizes in the Heimskringla. And this is sort of like a guiding principle for all the excavations done at the time. Also, Farmannshaugen, for example, is linked to King Bjorn and so on. So we have this obsession with semi-historical personalities, and then at the same time we also have the notion of using these mounds as some sort of markers for the agricultural landscape. Brøgger also had a very interesting idea, a very fantastic idea about linking this monument to Ravenna, because he thought that at some point, some king from Romerike would have visited Ravenna, and then they would have seen this glorious mausoleum of Theodoric the Great, and they would have been inspired to maybe construct something similar, which is profoundly exaggerated.
But that's not the first time that's done, is it? Because I'm trying to think, that link to the Ostrogoths and keeps coming back, and we do have it in some of the saga literature, don't we? So there's a sort of, I haven't really pursued that, but that's not a unique idea, is it? Or am I on the wrong track?
It's not a unique idea, and it also has to do a lot with the trend at the time to regard influences in the Norwegian landscape as being foreign. So they also try to explain that, with regards to the settlements, how did the settlements get formed? Were there people, nomadic groups, maybe coming from the steppes of Russia from the north, and then meeting some Germanic tribes in the south, and then they all blended together. So there wasn't this notion of something developing locally at the time, but rather there was this diffusion theory that was very, very popular. Yeah. So they basically insisted on this idea of mounds as expression of genealogy and ceremonial cultic power that prevailed for a very long time also in the interpretation of the 90s, for example, the excavation conducted by Dagfinn Skre. Okay, so let's have a quick look at Sigurd Grieg's excavation. Yeah.
Huge, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really big.
So this is where we first finally get a sense of the scale of the monument. I was looking at the side at Google Street View, which does actually allow you to get to the monument, and it is huge. But that you can't, until you dig into it, you can't appreciate when you have a slope from a photograph or a video. You can't get that in sense. That really brings it home. Thank you. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. Indeed. So Sigurd Grieg is the one who led the extensive excavation. It took place at a very problematic time. So during the war, 1939 and 1940, and he was under the supervision of the aforementioned Anton Brugger, and it was a transition from this, let's say, treasure hunting from the previous period towards a more professional approach. So the primary goal here was to explore the sociological properties of the structure and also investigate the ancient farms of the area as functional economic units. It's something that he also tried to do when he attempted a study about the Iron Age houses of the province of Lista. He was also involved in an investigation at Farmanshaugen, again a cenotaph mound, and other settlements in Vestfold. In this approach, they were also inspired by incipient dendrochronology, with which they became acquainted via the work of Edda Hult. But there were some problems of interpretation at the time, I think, because the dating falsely gave the 9th century. I think they tried to compare the way trees grew in this particular area with what was known from the studies done in the States on different species of trees. So I think that's where the problem lies. So yeah, we do have a dating at the time of the Viking Age, which is not accurate, but it was eventually corrected to the 6th century. Exactly, yeah.
They were trying, though. They were in that early techniques. Yeah, that's really...
They were really experimenting. Yeah. I think it's really interesting. Yeah. And what I find even more interesting is that he tried to integrate the excavation into the social problems of the time. For example, the unemployment and the need for national unity leading up to and during World War II. There was also a festive start in 39, which I think it's telling for the spirit of the age, and this combined with his ambition to also educate the workforce that was participating in this kind of undertaking, and his attempt to try to integrate this mound into the larger picture, and also his attempts to investigate the ancient farms of the area, although he didn't really arrive at a lot of results with this. So yeah, he basically turned this whole excavation into a school of labor, if I might call it like that. There was definitely some nationalism going on. I think it's understandable to a certain point, but they did a lot of things here that was very impressive to read about. Apparently, he was constantly organizing like these lessons about the history of Norway. And people there, the youth, were also learning how to compose poetry and songs, and there was even some of them even made up a band who wrote a song about the mound of King Rakni that was played at the radio. So that sort of of approach, and they also organized like theater plays about the death of King Rakni. So yeah, they were learning all kinds of things. They were also learning about manners, about how to conduct yourself, notions of hygiene, even dietetics, vocational skills. But then again, they were also learning quite a lot about Norwegian and European history. So despite this camouflaged nationalism, I think for the youth of the time, it would have been advantageous, to take part in such a project.
So this was funded by who exactly then?
This was funded by it was under Norwegian control at the time.
Yeah. So it was still
the collections of antiquities. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In Oslo and Bergen, so they were trying to avoid, during German occupation, they were trying to avoid the Germans coming and trying to appropriate that. And they had difficulties in doing that, actually, because the Germans did come with proposals of funding to ensure that the mound was integrated into like this new Aryan approach of history. But at the same time, Grieg and Brugge, they fought to maintain the mound as a national symbol. Yeah. And for the excavation, they also used the war jargon of the time. They mentioned attacking the mound from an eastern front and from a western front. That's the way they formulated it. They were referring to like digging the two shafts toward the center, and then the smaller cuts at the edges to obtain data on size and construction. And they also tried to involve experts in other disciplines to analyze soil and seeds. So yeah, in comparison to what Lorange was doing, we definitely have progress here. And they came to a bunch of interesting conclusions. They figured that the mound was built on a gentle slope, and they saw the layers of sand and peat, and they dug horizontally in 3 levels. They also discovered the log structure resembling a tent, and then the wooden pyramid, they noticed that was preserved very, very well due to the alternating clay layers. It also had a thin roof at the top, thick cuts with alternate fillings. Yeah, so they came to the conclusion that whoever built it must have been very, very experienced at any rate. So it was, in a way, a manner of celebrating Norwegian as trying to preserve it under the control of Norwegian authorities, and at the same time showing how special this mound was. Right. They also discovered that there was a grid of black soil at the bottom containing traces of plowing, which is something actually noticed not by the archaeologists, but by the foreman who was working with them. Yeah, speaking of intuition and experience, so the workers also contributed to this sort of like interpretation. So there was definitely something there on the ground before the mound was raised. Whether that played a part or not is up to interpretation. I tend to believe that yes, it was not accidental, and this is something we see on other sites as well, like the idea of using something that has a very concrete agricultural usage in order to construct a monument of deep significance on atop it afterwards. Right. They did notice as well that the lowermost part contained more trees like birch, willow, and rowan. And again, the foreman theorized that meant the scrub forest nearby was basically dragged to the site. They also discovered very, very thick logs. I think some of the thickest you would find in excavations of mounds, some equipped with so-called eyes, which were holes that were probably used in order to carry them. And they also noticed traces of burnt sand, a hearth, post holes, some small bone fragments. And this also led them to believe that it was indeed a monument that was built on a more ancient area. So I think So to me, it's very interesting to notice the parallels, because in the 6th century, we have this huge collective effort to build this in a time of crisis, probably. And this would parallel, I think, a little bit what they were doing in the 20th century. Because again, we have a time of crisis, we have a huge collective effort. This is also used as a school for the unskilled youth. So this sort of parallel that brings us together as humans centuries apart.
Fascinating, yeah.
Yeah. The mound was unfortunately a very, very bad state after doing this. It lay raised, basically, and this drew quite a lot of negative reactions from the locals. At any rate, the investigation enforced the cenotaph hypothesis. They also drew comparisons with other mounds, such as the one in Karmøy or Ringsaker, and they tried to nuance a little bit, I think, this hypothesis of these sites being a display of power, in the sense that they came up with the idea that maybe they would also think mounds at the same time. So mounds where you gathered around, probably inspired by the way the mounds were used in the Middle Ages, so later. Right. Speaking of inspiration, they were also influenced a little bit by Anglo-Saxon poetry and some Roman imperial practices, because related to the burnt traces they found, they also theorized that we might be dealing with a large funeral pyre for the pyramid. So that kind of thing. And then a couple of years later, we do have the unambiguous dating to the 6th century. So that was the correction of the initial dendrochronological analysis. Yeah. So the rehabilitation, right? That was also a big problem. Post World War II, there were failed attempts to properly restore it, and it was prolonged, and it was at the same time very much politically charged, and it again turned the site into like the sort of space of local identity and national resilience. The excavation was a milestone, scientifically speaking, definitely. However, the subsequent failure to restore the mound to its original height and glory, so to speak, it created a scandal in the community. And this was unfortunately resolved only a couple of decades later through intense public and political pressure. Following the liberation of Norway, the mound was framed as a nationally focused task, so it was no longer just an archaeological project. And then eventually the authorities approved the use of Norwegian individuals sentenced to forced labor for siding with the occupiers, seen as being deprived of honor and freedom. Now would have been a good opportunity to perhaps regain it. It is described as a Sisyphean task. It was very much more labor intensive than anticipated, it wasn't simply filling back large masses of earth into deep excavation shafts. You really had to structure it, and this is why in 1948 we actually come to a halt. Funding was cut in the antiquities collection. Yeah, so it was left looking very bad in a state of defeat, and its height had been reduced to about 4 meters. The top was flat, so you can imagine what it looked like. Yeah, and this was unacceptable to the farmers of the region, the farmers of Ullensaker, because they still held this belief that King Rakni was living there somewhere, and he would be very displeased to see how things worked out. And they also saw the incomplete restoration as a broken promise, and they claimed that the site looked as if vandals had been on the move. So yeah, we do have a very strong reaction from the general public, and also from the municipal council, and also from the Norwegian Farmers Association. And the controversy and the scandal were actually so big that the controversy eventually reached the Stortinget, so the National Parliament of Norway, forcing the national government to address the fate of the monument. And after many years of political pressure, the Ministry of Environmental Protection allocated the necessary funds, but this was happening only in the 60s.
Wow.
So, yeah, 23 years later, after the excavation ended, finally they used a bulldozer to restore the mound to its old profile and at least its correct height. So I think we can frame this whole episode as a commemorative success. It was either way hailed as a great victory for the people of Romerike and a landmark for the preservation of ancient monuments. Although the lack of stuff like a ship or the remains of a king prevented it from becoming a more widespread rallying point. So in comparison to the Oseberg ship, for example, definitely less important, less significant. So I'm coming back to this idea of unifying the individual daily life worlds of these people who took part in either the restoration or the excavation or the building of the monument. I think that the builders in the 6th century experienced this sort of emotion or as an active incorporating practice of mutual labor, and then the later observers experienced it as a site of memory. But in a way, both utilized the immensity and impressiveness of the mound to anchor their social identity in this sort of extreme distress.
And it's fascinating when you look at a monument like this. It's the biography of the monument, we'd call it, wouldn't we? The sort of, we have a 6th century story. We have many hidden, unclear layers of how it may have been perceived in the landscape on routes, and for local people, but people passing by, right the way up to the antiquarian era, and then this story of reconstitution, excavation reconstitution, and it's an unfolding story. I mean, it's got a heritage board, a couple of heritage boards. It's near the main Oslo airport. I don't know how well visited it is. It's not a Stonehenge for Norway, is it? It's not that. It's not really. It's never acquired the kind of Avebury, Stonehenge international tourist attraction status, but locally it still is it's a feature. And the other thing I suppose that comes to mind is, do we have really any parallels? I mean, yes, we've got other 6th century mounds, in Scandinavia, but in terms of this style of construction, I mean, is it really unique? And is therefore there's still a challenge of trying to approach it as a monument, because it doesn't fit into big mounds, elites. It doesn't fit into, if it is a crisis response, well, what is the exact parallels for it for the 6th century? It's still, I'm not sure I fully get my head around it, if you know what I mean, in terms of broader parallels, which is not a failing of, it's just we don't know everything about it and the sequence, and it's an intriguing. I've known about this monument, but I've never really got my head around it. And you've really helped me, but I'm still puzzled.
It raised more questions actually than answers.
No, I don't. There's no criticism.
A good thing.
It's intriguing. It's intriguing.
Well, intriguing to me as someone who rather deals with literary sources was also the parallel to a story I found in Bordar saga Snæfellsnes. It's like a saga made up of 2 parts. One of them is the story of Bord, who was this sort of like troll spirit guarding the peninsula of Snæfellsnes, and then the second part deals with his son called Gester. I'm not sure there is a connection here. Like, this all seems to be very disjointed, but we do have the this name of Rakni, who is presented as a legendary king who had once ruled Helluland, which was interesting to see because this points to the direction of North America. So there was in the saga, in this legendary saga, there was like this very distant memory about a king called Ragnar, who is associated with a very distant place and also a very distant time. So I found it interesting because we have all these names related to mounds, and this is something that we could also notice in this particular saga. So I'm not going to tell what it was about. I'm just going to summarize this episode. So this king Ragnar is presented as being a typical mound dweller, in the sense that it is a king who resides in his mound, and he challenges a hero to take away his treasure. And we do have sort of like the typical mound breaking episode with Gester, who is at the court of Olaf Tryggvason, and Gester, who takes this mission, and he also is joined by a priest in the mission, and we have the markers of the undead, such as him being fully armed, him boasting that no man is more brave than him, him leaving behind a foul odor, being seated on his throne, and also having on his side like 500 warriors in a ship or something like that. So I think it's a very distant memory that is filtered through multiple layers of history and folklore, and then from this perhaps historical story of a historical Ragnar, we are left with like this only vague idea of what could have been happening, or maybe the author sort of like made it up. But we do have something that points to the author also engaging a little bit in archaeology, right? Because we have the episode of mound breaking, we have the ship that is in the mound, and we have the treasure that is in the mound, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the story is definitely framed as a Christian missionary story, and at the same time as a confrontation between pre-Christian belief and Christianity, because this hero Gester, he manages to defeat Ragnar with the help of the priest. However, after receiving the help of King Olavur as well and defeating the Revenant, he dies because his father, who was a heathen, he was very displeased with what he had done, and he appears to him in sort of like a dream vision, more or less, and Gester ends up blinded and dead. So yeah, this is sort of like the revolt of the heathen past, So
Certainly
yeah.
already a fear of mounds and what they might contain that resonates
Definitely.
through, even if
Yep.
this is not connected to that mound.
Yep.
It's intriguing. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's not a physical anchor. I mean, we do have a lot of examples from, let's say, the more historical family sagas, where these are clearly some marks of something, either a family or a land or a farm, But in that sort of story, the more legendary one, it's not physical. It definitely belongs to a past that is made to look very uncanny and very uncomfortable for the people writing about it. Yeah. So like I said, I don't think it has anything to do with King Ragni's Mound. I just found it interesting because of of the cultural implications of that sort of literary interpretation, from the point of view of memory and framing these mounds as sites of memory.
Intriguing stuff. So what we need perhaps to do is to, in a future episode, is to delve back into, we've dealt with some of the Icelandic and we've gone to the east and looked at mounds which were intrigued. They weren't robbed, but there's still questions here about how this fits into the Scandinavian picture. Yeah.
Definitely.
So for me, I like that sword there, little sort of local, little bit of sculpture. I think there's a whole separate. I mean, I've done some of it on my blog. There's a whole archaeology of heritage interpretation of the panels, and I've just done a paper about Offa's Dyke in this regard, the many ways in which sculptures and artworks and installations, even if they're local and rather informal, add to sites. And we're always observing these, but they're not they need to be taken seriously as aspects of how memories are accreting in the modern world to these sites now. So I love the fact you
constantly adding new layers.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, and we're very engaged emotionally in these stories. Like beginning with the people who framed and constructed the monuments, up to us in the present, trying to make sense of them and trying to add something of our own. It's also very emotional. Yeah.
I think we cannot deny that archaeology draws out as many emotions as a piece of literature. In terms of breaking the earth, the discoveries that might be found, that aren't found, that could be found. The interpretation, the different debates about what the traces tell us. It captivates, it impassions people, and that's why archaeology attracts particularly strong nationalistic and other kinds of ethnically defined identitarian politics, but also very it's not just that. They're often the ones we warn about most, but there are many more positive emotional connections these sites can create, whether it's spiritual or ancestral or other. It can't always be pinned down, and often it's not discursive. That people, because it's about the material, about place, it rarely does it boil up into something people say. So these monuments can sit almost seemingly dormant, but they're very important for people, but they just don't talk about why they're important. No one's asking them, So those local farmers that are objecting, I think we could, if we had the techniques, we'd be able to capture some fascinating stories about what 17th, 18th, 19th century Norwegian farmers thought about mounds like this, but we just don't have it. And it's only rarely recorded. Fascinating.
Yeah. They would have definitely felt very, very connected to the place.
Yeah.
That's why they tried to preserve the legend for so long a time, despite the fact that they had all these scientific advances. Like this whole tendency to spiritualize the landscape did not go away.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Irina, for taking us on this fascinating
My
journey
pleasure.
into the biography of a mound from the 6th century to the present day. And now I want to go to Norway and see and imagine a new Rakni, we make up new stories about this non-existent king, and but no, it's fascinating stuff.
We're gonna write our own saga.
We need to, yes.
Yeah.
Add to the story. But thank you so much for that latest, and we'll be back for more episodes where we shall delve into more links between the different sources we have for monuments of different kinds in the Viking Age and later. And before.
Yeah, so follow us on YouTube, TikTok, Substack, wherever you get your videos and podcasts. Yeah,
all the places
everywhere.
that matter. Wherever the ubiquity, yeah. But thank you, and we'll share this on both our channels, so you can find it in both places. So thank you so much for watching.
And see you next time.